Hi there, my name is Apresian and I am a second year PhD student in the School of Politics and International Studies, University of Leeds, and I am doing a project about the political economy of climate change adaptation in Indonesia in the post-Paris Agreement. And now in this conference, I would like to present one part of my thesis, and I will discuss about the maladaptation of climate change adaptation program. Talking about climate actions, so there are two key components. The first one is climate change mitigation and the second one is climate change adaptation. If we are talking about mitigation, so we are trying to reduce the greenhouse gases emissions, global greenhouse gases emission, and climate change adaptation endeavor is trying to reduce the vulnerability of people or system and improve their adaptive capacity so they can adapt to and cope with climate change impact well. But climate change adaptation is often overshadowed by climate change mitigation because, for instance, the Climate Adaptation Fund doesn't get as much as mitigation, and global leaders' attention is more to mitigation compared to adaptation. But this year in January we have the first climate change adaptation summit, and that is good, and the global leader tried to promote 50-50 fund for adaptation and mitigation. And we have to consider that climate change adaptation programs might have unintended impacts because it can cause the so-called maladaptation. Okay, I'll start to give the definition of maladaptation. Barnett and O'Neill define maladaptation as action taken ostensibly to avoid or reduce vulnerability to climate change that impacts adversely on other systems, sectors, or social groups. In other words, the climate change adaptation programs do not reduce their vulnerability condition, but increase their vulnerability instead. For instance, a climate change adaptation program might distribute fertilizers to help farmers to prevent crop failures, but the synthetic fertilizer might generate nitrous oxide, which will increase greenhouse gases emissions, and that wouldn't be good. And Jumla proposed to distinguish between three types of maladaptations. The first one is those that create negative consequences for the implementing actors or target beneficiary themselves, so it's like a local maladaptations. And the second one is those that create negative consequences for one or more external actors, so it's like redistributing vulnerability to another place. And the third one, negative feedbacks on a global scale. Countries in the world experience the climate change impacts unequally, and I think the most of developing countries experience the impact of climate change more. And Indonesia is an archipelagic country where we are facing sea level rise that might disappear several small islands in Indonesia. And our President Joko Widodo, during several climate summit, always mentions that 80% of disasters experienced by Indonesia is climate-related disaster. So that is 80%. And for example, in 2019, we experienced 5 droughts, 47 floods, and then 105 cyclones, and that really impacts farmers and fisheries that really bring negative impact for them. Indonesia has certified Paris Agreement, and we have our National Action Plan on Climate Change Adaptation as recommended by the Paris Agreement, and Indonesia has implemented climate change adaptation programs as well, and formulated adaptation roadmap on nationally determined contributions. One interesting thing about climate change adaptation pledge, President Joko Widodo pledges that Indonesia will establish 20,000 climate village programs in 2024 to support climate change adaptation actions. It's quite ambitious target, considering that Indonesia has more than 83,000 villages in total. But the most important thing is not the pledges itself, but how the realization of those pledges. And the government of Indonesia is trying to mainstream climate change adaptation in many ministries and many levels, including province level, city, regency, district, and village level. And there are several problems in the policy making and implementation. First of all, climate change adaptation policy formulation and implementation is still dominated by top-down approach. And not many local actors understand climate change adaptation policy well. And second, local actors seems to be excluded during the policy making process. And the third one, the vulnerable groups are not involved in the policy making and the formulation of action program. So I think that's important to include all stakeholders in the policy formulation and implementation too. Yeah, about multi-level governance. So I utilize multi-level governance theory by Gary Marx. Multi-level governance includes the patterns of interactions and coordination systems within and between different levels. In my project, I will do the multi-level analysis including international, national, subnational, and village level. And I will discuss horizontal governance and vertical governance. Horizontal governance, mostly talking about interaction between actors in the same level, and vertical governance, discussing interaction between stakeholders in the different level or across level. Yeah, and that's interesting question, challenges and opportunities. Climate change adaptation mainstreaming is happening now, and many ministries has climate change adaptation programs and included climate change adaptation programs in their policy documents, such as strategic plan of the ministries. However, for horizontal governance, there is a coordination problem caused by sectoral ego, we call it, because the programs are scattered. Each ministries has their own programs, and there is no coordinating ministries that can coordinate the implementation of climate change adaptation programs in Indonesia. For vertical governance, there is another coordination problem. We have national action plan on climate change adaptation, but the local governments seems to not refer to that document, and they are not involved in the policy making process. Another example of miscoordination is that Indonesia government has pledged to establish 20,000 climate village program in 2024, but until now there is no clear mandate given to the local government to expand the number of climate village programs, and there is no incentive or fund distributed to the local at the moment. So the programs are basically not sustainable. So for example, I interviewed one local government representative, and she said that from 3 climate village programs, only 2 still exist now. Some programs might give benefits to the vulnerable groups, but we have to consider that these programs might have unintended impacts that might increase vulnerability or redistribute it to another place, even in a global scale. I haven't done the fieldwork yet, but based on virtual interview I did with some NGOs in Indonesia, I got several examples, such as the government built wave breakers in one area in the coastal area of North Java Island to prevent high wave reaching fishermen houses, but it didn't solve the problem. The wave breakers only distribute the wave or the vulnerability to another coastal area. Another example, the government distributed free seeds to help farmers, but the seeds were not suitable to be planted in the soil with less water. The seeds didn't grow, and the farmers missed growing season already, and it caused crop failures. And the government also built 9 dams in one province in the eastern part of Indonesia, but the rainfall level is quite low, so the dams couldn't function optimally. I think vulnerability assessment to climate change need to be done when we can identify most vulnerability area or most vulnerable people. We can distribute the adaptation resource to the most needed one. And vulnerability assessment should include local actors. And the stakeholders need to utilize bottom-up approach. So top-down approach is still dominant approach used by the government, but involving the vulnerable groups in designing program actions to know what they need is really important. And the involvement of the vulnerable groups should not just invite them to a meeting once or twice, but make sure their voice is heard and accommodated. And maladaptation aspects should also be included in the planning process of climate change adaptation programs. It's important to avoid maladaptation happens. And monitoring and evaluation should be taken seriously and thoroughly to avoid maladaptation.